there's another challenge with reconciliation. Even assuming the Republicans have the votes, there are certain limits in terms of what you can do in a reconciliation bill. And I know one of the things they talked about was doing something with regard to immigration, presumably, you know, building the wall or, deportation. But that requires spending money, which is normally done through appropriations. And as I understand it, you can't do normal, discretionary appropriation bills or funding provisions in a reconciliation bill. Is there some way around that? Can they?
Yeah,
Can they do?
Democrats actually, to their I don't to their credit, may not be the right word, but that's how Republicans are going to talk about it. Pioneered converting what had typically been a discretionary appropriation. I'm thinking IRS funding now, right? In the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRS got $80 billion of mandatory funding. So, Steve, you're right. You
Mhm.
can't do discretionary appropriations in a reconciliation bill, but you can do mandatory funding in a reconciliation. We've been doing mandatory funding in reconciliation bills since the dawn of time, or since the dawn of of reconciliation, both increases and decreases. And if you are willing to convert what had typically been a discretionary account into a mandatory account, as Democrats did with the IRS in the Inflation Reduction Act, then you can make it legitimately eligible to be included in a reconciliation bill. So yeah, you're not going to do discretionary appropriation for border enforcement or more immigration judges or detention centers or things like that. But if you have the votes to convert that into mandatory spending, then as Democrats showed in the Inflation Reduction Act, um, you can do it. And so I imagine those are the policies, sent that their immigration policies pursued through reconciliation. It will be more spending on pick a policy priority, whether it's barriers at the border or enforcement, interior enforcement, or judges, or whatever it is. Now, what you won't be able to do, or at least traditionally have not been able to do in reconciliation, is um, make immigration policy changes. Like if there's been some discussion of birthright citizenship. Like if you wanted to change that by statute, that's probably not something you can do through budget reconciliation, setting aside whether that's you could do by statute or have to amend the Constitution. But even if you could do it by statute, that's probably not a reconciliation statute. That's a regular 60 votes in the Senate kind of thing. Just like Democrats tried to increase the minimum wage in reconciliation and discovered, even though it had a revenue effect, a negative one, as it turns out, the parliamentarian said, yeah, that revenue effect is incidental to the policy being pursued. So spending, qua spending, if you're willing to convert it into mandatory funding, based on the 2022 precedent in the Inflation Reduction Act, that seems like it's total fair game. Even pursuing things that look to me anyway, like not really budget policy, like in the Inflation Reduction Act, you have certain enhancements to incentives if you paid a prevailing wage or use an apprentice or did it in a particular community that felt more like labor policy. But the parliamentarian said, no, you're just enhancing your tax credit. That's fair game. So there are some precedents from the Inflation Reduction Act that I think Republicans are going to be looking at and saying, oh, well, if Democrats could do that in 2022, we can take the flip side of that coin and pursue what looks maybe not like pure budget policy, but we can make it budget policy sufficient to pass the test under reconciliation.